Hi folks, and welcome back. What if I told you that one day I saw a tree by a river and it was so unique, I thought, you know what, I could make something of that tree and bring it to my home, but I didn't own an axe. What if I told you that I borrowed my neighbor's axe and it was expensive and rare and hard to get? And I took that axe because he trusted me with it and he trusted me to be a good steward of it. And I took that axe and I went down and began to chop down the tree, but I made a slip. I made a slip and I hit the axe head and broke it off. And when I came back, the axe head flew into the water and it happened to be the deepest part of the water. And what if I told you I wept? And while I was weeping, Jesus came to me and said, what are you weeping about? And I told him it was simply an axe head that I borrowed from my neighbor and he trusted me with it. And now, oh Lord, how can I face this man? And Jesus, for no other purpose than to stop the servant from crying, made the axe head swim. In other words, made it float and swim toward me so that I could reach out and grab it. What if I told you that was the story? Would you believe me? And would it matter? Would you withhold sharing it because you're afraid of the skeptic or the person that is in bondage to unbelief? I hope not. The scriptures tell us that we are to proclaim his goodness and his testimonies and all that he speaks to us in all of that. So give him praise for every miracle in your life. And don't be ashamed to tell people, despite the critic, despite the skeptic, if God did it in your life, it is withholding of the truth not to tell it. And if the opportunity presents itself, obviously somebody of your hearers need the encouragement in their lives. So tell the wonderful things the Lord has done. This video is about a couple of the things the Lord has done in my life, and including where this story from the axe head derives. Some of you may have put it together already, but stay tuned. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Hi everyone, and thank you for subscribing and thank you for watching these videos. You know, I noticed that I lost a subscriber, and it kind of grieves me. And my wife is saying, you know, you're going to have skeptics. I get that. I understand. I'm going to have people who hate me, and let it be for the truth. I'm just doing some investigations here. I'm presenting you with stories of revival. I'm presenting you with testimonies and also of people from the past. And I don't always draw maybe even the right conclusions. I pray about it, and I just present as I feel the Lord is leading me to present on these videos. And some of you out there aren't going to like who I'm talking about because in your minds, you've already considered them heretics or ungodly. And there are some very ungodly men, and I will mention those by name as well. There are some who are bordering, and I don't know what to always do with that. So I use this forum to speak about, these things that you might also leave comments if you want as to what you think about these people. It's helpful as long as you're not rude about it. I think it could be very edifying to me, and hopefully I'm edifying to you as I discuss these people and the reality of miracles. I was talking to my niece not too long ago, and she said that she was in a prayer group sharing, there was people sharing about all of the wonderful miracles that were going on, and this one man who had his prayers unanswered, and I think he had lost somebody who was very close to him. I think it might even have been a wife that died despite him beseeching the Lord. And so I think he had felt that, I don't have that testimony where God did this wonderful miracle. And, another time, before I get too far off track, I just want to say that I'm not presenting just the good things. I do, the scriptures do say only things that are good and lovely. I understand that as well. I remember I talked last video about balance, and it's important to have balance. not to cater to people who just want to talk about the prayers that weren't answered. That doesn't make any sense. And also not to ignore the people who've had terrible experiences about the Lord not answering their prayers. That happens, you know. One time I was asked to join a group of people to pray for a woman who, at 42, a very good friend of mine, and it grieves me just to talk about this, but she was a very good friend of my wife and I, and her name was Debbie, and she was a beautiful, wonderful Christian person, and they had asked me to come and join them to pray, and I went in there with the faith to heal. In fact, sitting at a table in a church dinner, I had said that I'm going to be going down there to pray with these people, and one woman sitting at the table was offended that I should think that God didn't want to take her life, because basically she was on life support and she was unresponsive. Brain was unresponsive, which, by the way, my dad was in that, and the Lord raised him up. So I was going in there with the experience to know that God can do this if he wants to today. And so I was sharing that I'm hoping that God would raise her up, and she got offended because I should think that God would do that. And I was confused that there would be, it just made her uncomfortable to think that somebody would try to go into a hospital and pray for somebody not to be dead. To me, that was unbelief, and I wonder about her regenerated state. But that's not uncommon now that I'm older and I find that out. Anyway, I went into this hospital. Did God raise her up? No. Oh, you know what? We fasted and prayed, and we were there. And this woman, though they say she was brain dead and unresponsive, I witnessed as we prayed for her to come back to life. I witnessed her eyes filling up with water and tears running down her face. And that was just before she passed away. I think she was touched by us praying. I think God in the spiritual realm showed her what we were doing, gave her the choice. And who would want to come back once they've been with the Lord? And maybe this is one of those things. At least that's how I see what had happened there. But I'm certainly not going to cater to the unbeliever. So I just wanted to say that. As far as the story goes about the Axehead, some of you may have already put it together. This is a story from 2 Kings chapter 6. Now, it wasn't Jesus, but the prophet, and prophets often have found themselves in the Old Testament as being representatives or prophetic symbols of the Christ to come. And I think this is one of those instances where that servant of Elisha, one of the sons of the prophets, basically, and you could read this story for yourself in 2 Kings 6, basically, the sons of the prophets said, listen, we are cramped and we need to build, because I guess there was a lot of prophets and a lot of people supporting Elisha and knowing that the power was there and that he has the words of life in him. And so they wanted to learn from him, who cared to be godly. But they said, listen, we're cramped. And so they said, let us go down to Jordan and cut down some trees, bring them back and build. And so Elisha says, absolutely, go ahead and build. And then it says that one servant had borrowed an axe. Now, my son pointed out something amazing that I didn't think about. You know, the Bronze Age was supposedly, 700 or 800 years BC. And I say BC as in before Christ. I don't love that they call it before the Common Era. You call it what you want. And if you're okay with it, that's fine. But personally, it's before Christ and after Christ, because Christ split history. I just want to throw that out there. Maybe I'm a little old-fashioned, but I'm vehemently opposed to calling it Anno Domini and all of those things. No, thank you. I'll call it before Christ or after death. Anyway, before Christ. It could have went back as far as 1,000 years considered the Iron Age, I should say. The Bronze Age was before that, so anywhere further than 1,000 years BC is definitely the Bronze Age. What's interesting here that my son pointed out, I think this was well over 1,000 years before Christ, that this incident took place in 2 Kings 6, and yet his axe was iron. So the point I'm trying to make is that that axe was actually it was probably so rare, being that it was the Bronze Age, it was probably so rare that few had an iron axe head. It would have been very expensive. It's like you borrowing somebody's very expensive laptop or even their favorite vehicle and crashing it. I mean, that was what this servant was crying about. That's why it was so devastating to him, because he lost something of rare and high value, and it went into the river. And what does the man of God do? He prays to God. He throws a stick in there, and the axe head comes to the surface. Not only did it come to the surface, but the scriptures say in the King James Version that it swam. And I'm thinking, I get this picture in my head that it swam toward him. And he was able to reach out his hand by the instruction of the man of God. And he got the axe head back. And what a miracle and what a testimony. Now, if nobody else was around, who would believe that that happened? It doesn't matter who was around. It doesn't matter if people believe you, but tell what the Lord has done. And that's the whole point of this particular video and of the story I'm about to tell you. But I got to take you back a couple of years. A couple of years ago, the same young woman who I told you about asked me to come and pray for this Muslim girl, who her fiance at the time, and now they're married, but her fiance at the time was on a BMX bike, I think, at a skate park, and he came down hard on his head. He had cracked his head so bad that he was dealing with a type of amnesia that often brain trauma, and this can last a lifetime in some. This brain trauma was basically, he had about 10 or 15 minutes of memory, and then it would be wiped. So every 10 or 15 minutes, he's having to reimagine his life. And when I found out about this was a very serious matter, and I decided, and I prayed about it, and I prayed before I went. She had asked me to come down and pray for him, and given me permission to pray for him. I said, absolutely. I got that little bottle of olive oil, and I put it on my hands, and I prayed to the Lord, and I lifted up my hands to him, and I asked him to bless my hands as I go into the hospital. And I didn't touch anything. I was wanting my hands not to touch anything until I get to him. And so I get to the hospital, and hopefully I'm not going too fast for you, but I get to the hospital, and this young man is sitting in a chair. He seems happy. He seems hurt. He's obviously stiff. But I noticed that in the room was an officer of the law. There was his mother, or his stepmother, and there was people lingering who cared for him and who loves him. And there was this young woman holding his hand, just caressing his shoulder and just trying to encourage him as he loses his memory every 10 or 15 minutes, and he begins to weep because obviously he's scared and he doesn't know what's going on. Now, the officer of the law said something to him and said something just jokingly, like he had almost convinced him he had a wife and children at home, and this caused him a little bit of stress. So I went in there. And I don't think people understood how serious it was, but I knew in my spirit this was a very serious matter that would have lasted a lifetime. Before I touched anything, before anybody had the opportunity to come and shake my hand, I just stopped everybody and I said, does anybody here mind if I pray for this young man? Of course, who's going to say no? And if they do say no, I'm sure there would be enough opposition that would allow me to go in, but I stepped forward, and in faith, I wanted to see an axe head float. And according to the doctors, this was a serious matter and too big for medicine. And so I stepped in wanting the axe head to float. And I say that obviously it's proverbial. I'm saying that there's no axe head in the room. I'm sure you understand. But I walked up to this young man and I put my hands upon his one hand on his neck, and I put the other hand up, and I closed my eyes, and I believed that that axe head was going to float, and I asked Jesus to make that happen, and to make this a miraculous circumstance that I might give glory to him, that I might share in the future, and I'm sharing it with you now. I lifted up my hand and I prayed for him. I asked God that he would heal him, and I had left shortly after that, but this is the testimony of the young man. This is not my testimony. I had left at this point, but the young man said that he felt something moist on his neck, obviously the olive oil. He said he went like this to feel, what is that? And the moment he looked at his hand, he got his memory completely back. He was completely healed, and his memory came back. He didn't lose his memory from that point. That was his first memory that stuck. Isn't that amazing? All because an unworthy servant doing what I ought to do went into the hospital believing that God is capable of healing the impossible thing. And it's there available for you. Now, every one of us, remember I said about the axe head and I kind of stumbled up there. I guess that's the whole point of this video and why it is I'm sharing this with you. What is your axe head? What has fallen into the river for you? Is there anything in your life that makes you feel like it's gone? That is there are you unhealthy? Is there a miracle that you're needing for God to perform in your life? Have you confessed all unknown sin? Are you living right with the Lord? Then get right with the Lord and go to him and expect of the Lord to do these miraculous things. It's available to you. Ask and you will receive. The Lord will do the impossible, and that axe head will swim right to you. Thanks for listening. I hope this has encouraged you. Bye.